They say some roads remember what happened on them. I used to think that was nonsense until I bought a used car that refused to forget. It was supposed to be a bargain, a silver 2017 sedan, clean interior, smooth engine, barely 60,000 miles. But when I turned on the GPS for the first time, a destination popped up automatically. Home. Only it wasn't mine. Curious, I followed it. And what I found that night wasn't just a location. It was a confession, a map to betrayal, and the start of someone's unfinished revenge. They say every machine has a memory, that even when you clear the data, erase the files, and start over, something always lingers. I used to think that was just talk, until I bought that silver 2017 sedan. It was supposed to be an ordinary purchase. A good deal, really. A man in my line of work appreciates a well-kept engine. I'm a mechanic and been one for 20 years. Engines don't lie to me. People do sometimes. But a motor, it always tells the truth. The seller was an older man, polite, quiet. Said he was selling it for his daughter who'd passed away. His voice cracked once when he mentioned her name. Emma. I didn't pry. People carry their grief in different ways. I shook his hand, signed the papers, and drove the car home. It was a smooth ride, responsive steering, transmission tight as a drum. Whoever owned it before took care of it, or maybe loved it. That night, I parked it in the garage beside my truck, wiped the hood clean, and smiled. A good machine, reliable, something solid in a world that wasn't anymore. I didn't plan to turn on the GPS that night, but curiosity got the better of me. The previous owner had left the system synced to her account. The screen blinked awake and a single destination appeared, already set as home. Only when it wasn't my address, I almost cleared it. Almost. But something about it felt personal. Like opening someone's old diary by mistake. I hesitated. The map showed a point about 20 miles outside of town, near a river, an area where construction had started last year. I remember thinking, what's the harm in a drive? So I took the keys, got back in, and let the car guide me. The night was calm, the road half lit by moonlight. The hum of the tires on asphalt was oddly soothing. But then the GPS did something strange. It recalculated mid-route without any reason, and the robotic voice said, "Turn left onto Bridgeway Road." Bridgeway. I knew that name. It was the bridge the town had rebuilt after a storm washed the old one away. Locals said a woman had died there months before. I didn't realize it yet, but I was driving straight toward the place where Emma Langford's story ended. As I crossed the bridge, the headlights hit the guardrail, glinting on a small plaque bolted into the metal. I slowed down and saw her name engraved on it. Emma Langford, beloved daughter and friend. I parked, engine still idling, the GPS still glowing softly. Then, without me touching anything, the screen flickered. The map disappeared. A message appeared instead. He killed me. Ask her. I just stared. My first thought was that someone had hacked the system, maybe left a weird prank. But the word sat there, frozen, as if the car itself wanted to speak. I turned the ignition off, waited, then started it again. The same message came back. I don't scare easily. Years in the shop, late nights, silence and oil fumes make you used to solitude. But in that moment, a chill ran up my arms. I drove home in silence, the GPS still whispering directions even though I wasn't following them anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like an echo from that message. Who was he? Who was her? Why leave this behind? By morning, I convinced myself I needed answers. Not because I believed in ghosts, but because a machine doesn't lie. So I did what I do best. I started taking things apart. I went over every inch of that car, inside and out. When I lifted the floor mat on the passenger side, something rattled underneath. A small metal panel, loose. I unscrewed it and found a tiny compartment that wasn't part of the factory design. Inside was a flash drive wrapped in electrical tape, the kind of thing you hide when you don't want someone to find it. I plugged it into the shop laptop. It took a moment to read. 5 video files appeared, each dated around 6 months ago. The first one opened with a shaky view of the car's dashboard. A woman's voice, scared, breathing fast. Then she turned the camera toward herself, pale, eyes wide, trembling. "If anyone finds this," she whispered, "please. He's not who he says he is. He says he's protecting me, but he's lying. If something happens to me, check the bridge cameras." He took my phone. He said it's for my safety. Then a car door slammed off screen and the video ended. I just sat there staring at the blank screen. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, heavy. Because part of me already believed her, I watched the other clips. They were shorter, fragments of panic. In one, she mentioned a name, Evan. In another, she said, she doesn't know what he's done. A he. A she. Maybe the man who sold me the car didn't just lose his daughter. Maybe he'd been trying to erase her story. I copied everything, backed it up on an encrypted drive, and hid the original flash drive inside a sealed air filter. Then I started to dig. Evan Ridley. The name led me to a construction firm, Ridley Developments, one of the biggest housing companies in the state. Their office was downtown, the kind of place with glass walls and polished marble floors. I'd heard of the guy. Charismatic, successful, married to a woman named Rachel. She used to come into my garage years ago when her car needed servicing. She'd smile, make small talk, and once she laughed at the grease on my hands. "You must love your work," she said. I did. Back then I loved her too. But that's another story. Now, seeing her name linked to Evan's made something in me click. Rachel. The she. I stared at my laptop, at the still frame of Emma's terrified face, and realized what the car had been trying to tell me all along. This wasn't random. This was personal. That evening, I went back to the seller's address, but the house was empty. "For sale" sign on the lawn. The neighbor said he'd moved 2 weeks ago. No forwarding address, a convenient disappearance. The next morning, I went to Ridley Developments. Rachel was there. Same bright smile, just colder now. Her hair shorter, her tone professional. "Mark," she said, pretending surprise. "It's been ages. What brings you here?" I told her I was thinking of investing in property. She liked that answer. Her husband's firm was taking on investors, she said. Big returns, stable portfolio. I smiled, nodded, pretended interest. Meanwhile, my mind kept replaying Emma's voice. "He killed me." "Ask her." Rachel excused herself for a call. Her phone screen lit up for a second, and I saw the contact name. Evan. When she came back, she had that careful calm only guilty people have. She handed me a brochure. "You've done well for yourself," she said, almost softly. Maybe she could see it in my face. I wasn't the man she'd left years ago. The mechanic she'd called too simple. I thanked her, walked out, and stood on the sidewalk as traffic rushed by. Somewhere behind those glass walls, 2 people were living comfortably on the memory of a woman who begged for help and never got it. I decided then. I wasn't calling the police. I wasn't going to hand over what I'd found. People like them had friends in high places, lawyers, PR teams. They'd twist it all into a tragedy no one could prove. No, this would be handled quietly. Not out of anger, but precision. That's the difference between vengeance and justice. When I got home, the car was waiting in the dark, silent, like it understood what I was about to do. I sat inside, turned the key halfway, and watched the GPS flicker once more. The old route was still there. Bridgeway Road, the place where it all ended. The message didn't appear this time. Just a blank screen, as if it knew I'd already heard what I needed to. I closed my eyes, rested my hands on the wheel and whispered, "Don't worry. Emma, I'll finish it." The engine hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat, and for the first time since I bought that car, I felt something close to purpose again. I kept driving for weeks with that same car, the same faint hum of its engine echoing beneath the quiet weight of unanswered questions. Every morning I'd start the ignition and feel the GPS flicker awake, like a patient machine remembering what it was built to do. But the screen no longer showed home. It was blank, as if it too was waiting for me to ask the right question. I began retracing the routes saved inside the navigation memory, each one a silent breadcrumb from whoever had owned the car before me. There were grocery stores, a repair shop, a lake, and then buried between them, a single entry with no name, just coordinates, the kind you had to type deliberately. I copied them down, not out of curiosity, but out of something heavier. The need to understand why this car seemed to hold a conscience of its own. The coordinates led me 40 miles north, to a small town I hadn't seen since I was a kid. When I arrived, there was nothing remarkable, just an empty stretch of road, some dying trees, and a faded mailbox half buried in gravel. Yet standing there, engine cooling, I felt the same prickling tension as when you realize a photograph has someone standing behind you that you never noticed before. I looked closer at the mailbox. A name was etched faintly along the side, E. Marin. The same name on the registration papers that had come with my bill of sale. I thought about that for a long minute, then took a walk down the gravel path. The house beyond it was abandoned, window glass clouded with dust, the porch eaten by weather. And there, on the door, someone had scratched 3 words into the paint. She took everything. I don't know why I turned away then. Maybe because I understood that feeling too well. Maybe because the wind that passed through those hollow rooms carried the same kind of silence my life had lately learned to live with. Driving home, the engine felt different, quieter. I told myself it was my imagination, but when I parked that night, the GPS came alive on its own again. No destination, just a line of text across the screen. Find her. The next days became a blur of ordinary routines. Work, coffee, the sound of rain against the shop roof. But beneath each hour, a current pulled me back to that screen, to that abandoned house, to the name Marin. Who was she? Or was she the one who'd taken everything? I did what any mechanic would do when logic fails. Look under the hood. I removed the GPS unit, expecting nothing but wires and circuits. Instead, wedged behind the casing was a folded note, small and fragile with age. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. It read only one thing. If you're reading this, she's still free. That sentence hit like the echo of someone else's grief crossing time. I felt the air leave my lungs. Whoever had owned this car hadn't just left a message. They'd left a burden, and somehow it had landed in my hands. For nights I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same image. The woman the note spoke of, the man who'd written it, the story between them that ended with a plea hidden inside a dashboard. People talk about ghosts in houses. I had one in my passenger seat, then came the detail that turned everything. When I finally looked up the previous owner's records online, I discovered E. Marin was declared missing 6 years ago. The last known contact from his phone pinged less than a mile from the address the GPS had called home. The report listed one next of kin, Rachel Marin. It was a coincidence too sharp to ignore. Rachel, the same woman whose name had appeared months earlier on one of my company's client lists. A new investor, polished, confident, charming in a way that made people forget to check the fine print. And me, just a mechanic who fixed other people's mistakes, both mechanical and otherwise. Would you like me to continue directly with the second half of part 2, the next 100, 300 words? So we reach the full part 2, the 500-word section, and carry the story toward the point where Mark begins his quiet plan for revenge? You said yes, ChatGPT said perfect, buddy. Continuing straight into the second half of part 2 in the same narration flow and tone. No headings, no breaks, just calm, intelligent, cold justice energy. When I first saw her name, I thought it had to be coincidence. Rachel was a common enough name. But memory doesn't make mistakes the way people do. It saves tone, posture, the subtle tilt of a smile that hides calculation. She had once walked into our company's quarterly meeting like she owned the place. Everyone called her the strategic visionary. I called her trouble wrapped in perfume. She was married then to a man who handled the paperwork while she handled the charm. Evan Marin. The same name I just traced on that mailbox. It all started to fall into place. The missing husband, the wife now reinvented as an investor, the GPS pleading for someone to find her. I began to notice things I'd missed before. The way her emails were written. Short and flawless, no warmth, no errors, like she proofread her emotions before sending them. The way she'd introduced herself to me months ago, calling me Mark like we were old friends when I'd never met her before. I spent hours going through the car's old maintenance receipts. One stood out, a repair shop 30 miles from the Marin address. The signature at the bottom wasn't Evan's, it was Rachel's. That was when I realized the car she sold had once been his. And she hadn't even bothered to change the registration completely. She'd only folded the paper so her name looked like a witness instead of the seller. The dots started connecting themselves, one after another, until they drew a picture I didn't want to see. I thought about calling the police. I even drafted an anonymous email once, typed every detail and hit save as draft. But justice through procedure felt too clean for what she'd done. People like Rachel lived on the edge of loopholes, always one step ahead of consequence. I wanted her to feel something rawer, so I waited. I began inviting her to corporate briefings again, made sure her company received our contracts, let her believe she was the smartest person in the room. She smiled more when I spoke, maybe because she thought she was studying a pawn who didn't know the game. What she didn't see was that every deal she signed placed her closer to a cliff she built herself. She began overextending. New projects, expensive risks, all under her name. I made certain our documentation was immaculate. Her arrogance would do the rest. And then came the moment the GPS spoke again. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but when I started the car that morning, it flickered and a saved address appeared on the screen. One I'd never entered. A quiet property outside the city near a lake. The same lake from one of the earlier routes. I drove there at dusk. The water was still, the sky bruised with fading light. The house nearby was small but tidy, clearly maintained. I didn't go inside, didn't even step beyond the driveway. I just sat in the car, engine idling, and waited for some part of the past to show itself. It did, in the form of a caretaker who came out to close the gate. When he saw me, he paused, then nodded as if recognizing something in my face. He said the owner visited once a year, always alone, always bringing flowers. He pointed to a small memorial stone near the shore, Evan Marin. 1982-2017, so he wasn't missing. He was buried there, quietly, without investigation, without the noise of justice. That night, I sat in the car until the sky turned black. The lake reflected nothing, not even guilt. I thought about the note, "She's still free," and felt the faint tremor of a promise settling inside me. From then on, I stopped avoiding Rachel. I started studying her. Her social circles, her public appearances, her carefully controlled interviews about integrity and leadership. Everything she touched was built on the bones of someone else's silence. It didn't take much to find the weakness. Pride. Pride makes people broadcast their victories too soon, so I gave her something to celebrate. I offered her access to a new project, high stakes, massive return, one that would need her personal endorsement. For weeks, she played the role perfectly, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, investing every dollar she could access. She didn't notice the clauses, the quiet strings that tied liability to her alone. When the market turned and the project failed, every investor she'd charmed turned their blame toward her. She begged for explanations, called for audits, claimed manipulation. But all the records, every timestamp, every contract, every email pointed back to her decisions. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. I just watched the slow unraveling of a woman who'd once believed she could rewrite truth to suit her. When the last investor pulled out, she vanished from the public eye. Rumor said she sold her assets and moved somewhere quiet near water. Maybe to the same lake I kept the car. I replaced the GPS but kept the note behind the dashboard. Sometimes when the road is empty and the night feels longer than it should, I turn on the engine and imagine that quiet voice again, whispering through static. Find her. Maybe I did. Maybe the universe handled the rest. Either way, the coordinates of guilt finally stopped flashing. The car drives straight now. No more unexpected turns. And when people ask me why I still keep an old sedan when I can afford better, I tell them it reminds me of something simple. Justice doesn't always knock. It sometimes drives. I thought everything was finished. Rachel's empire had folded in silence. The investors had scattered like birds startled by their own reflection. The story faded from the business columns faster than I expected. No one mentioned my name. No one knew that the man who engineered her downfall still drove the same car that once belonged to her husband. I kept the sedan tuned and quiet. It had become my companion, a mirror of the part of me that didn't need to speak. For weeks, nothing unusual happened. The GPS stayed blank. No ghostly destinations, no flicker of coordinates. Just the soft hum of tires against asphalt and the illusion of peace. But calm has a way of making you careless. One night, while checking the glove box for registration papers, I found a memory card wedged behind the lining. I wouldn't have noticed it if the flashlight hadn't caught the faint glint of metal. It was small, labeled with a single word written in permanent marker, proof. I told myself not to look. I told myself I'd already had enough ghosts for one lifetime. But curiosity isn't something you can switch off. It's a current that keeps running long after the power's gone. When I plugged the card into my computer, a single folder appeared. Inside it were photos, hundreds of them, organized by date. They weren't vacation pictures or family portraits. They were documents, screenshots, financial statements, property transfers, emails. Every piece of them pointed toward one truth. Evan Marin had known. He'd discovered Rachel's double life long before she'd ever filed a single corporate form under her own name. He had recorded everything. Her hidden accounts, her meetings with partners she called consultants, the transfer of funds that slowly stripped him of ownership. And buried at the end of the list was a video file dated 3 weeks before his death. I watched it once, without sound at first. Evan sat in his car, the same one I owned now, parked by the lake. He looked exhausted but calm. When I unmuted the audio, his voice was measured, the tone of a man who had accepted something irreversible. He said he'd confronted Rachel that night, told her he was transferring their assets into a trust that excluded her until an audit cleared her of fraud. She'd laughed, called his bluff, and left. The next day, his car was found abandoned by the water. The official report said accidental drowning. The file ended there, but not his message. He turned to the camera one last time and said, "If someone finds this, make sure she never uses what's mine to build her empire." I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen painting my hands pale. That was the moment I realized my revenge hadn't been my idea at all. I was just the continuation of his, The car, the GPS, the note, they weren't cries for help. They were instructions. The realization felt both heavy and hollow. I wasn't the avenger. I was the instrument. Everything I'd done had followed a path already laid by a man who'd refused to disappear quietly. For a long time, I couldn't move. I thought of Rachel again, of the panic on her face when the market turned against her. Had she known? Had she felt his presence in the way I had? Or had she truly believed her ruin was just bad luck? The next morning I drove back to the lake. The air was colder than I remembered, the kind of chill that seeps into memory. I parked in the same place where Evan had filmed himself and waited for sunrise. The water was still. Mist hovered above it like breath. For a moment, I could almost see the reflection of a man sitting beside me. I whispered a thank you, to him, to the car, maybe to fate itself, for steering me where I needed to go. Then I turned on the ignition. The GPS blinked once, hesitated, and for the first time since that night, displayed a message. Drive east. It wasn't coordinates, just those two words. I followed them out of instinct. The route led me through back roads until I reached a small industrial storage lot, half abandoned. The gate was open. Inside were rusting containers, weeds, and the faint smell of oil. One unit stood out, number 17, its lock already broken. Inside, I found boxes stacked to the ceiling. More records, more proof. Evan hadn't just built a trail. He'd left an archive of everything she'd done, meticulously labeled, sealed away in case the world ever forgot. I realized then that my quiet victory over Rachel was only the surface of a larger reckoning. Evan's message hadn't been a plea for someone to find her. It was a command to finish what he'd started. I stayed in that storage unit until dawn. Dust clung to my hands, the faint hum of the fluorescent light above me flickering like an old heartbeat. I flipped through document after document, bank transfers, fake invoices, offshore accounts, and slowly, a pattern began to form. Rachel hadn't just stolen from her husband. She'd built her fortune on laundering his investments, feeding money through shell companies that connected back to names I recognized from the corporate world. It wasn't just greed. It was an entire ecosystem of betrayal, and Evan had cataloged it all. At the bottom of one box, I found a sealed envelope addressed simply to the next one who understands. Inside was a single page. No instructions. No explanations. Just a question. Will you expose her or erase her? For the first time, I felt the true weight of revenge. It wasn't anger anymore. It was responsibility. I sat there for hours thinking. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the realization that I could destroy her completely. One click, one upload, and every name connected to her empire would burn in the same fire. But there was something darker lurking beneath that thought, a part of me that wanted her to feel it instead, so I chose the slower path. That evening, I sent a package to her new office. Inside, I placed a single flash drive with one file, the video of Evan by the lake. No threats, no blackmail. Just the truth she'd buried with him. 2 days later, she resigned from her company. No statement. No farewell posts. The news outlets reported she had retired abroad. But I knew better. Some people don't run from justice. They run toward it, hoping it won't recognize them. I didn't contact her again. I didn't need to. Weeks passed. The car grew quieter, as if it too had finished its purpose. I replaced the oil, the tires, the filters. Routine maintenance for a machine that had carried ghosts long enough. But one night as I sat inside it, engine off, I noticed something glowing faintly on the GPS screen again. Not directions this time. Just 2 words, thank you. For the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't satisfaction, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes when a storm has passed, leaving only silence and clean air. I drove to the lake one last time, parked where Evan had filmed his message, and left the car keys on the dashboard. The morning sun broke through the fog, touching the water with gold. I stood there for a while, listening to the soft lapping of waves. Then I turned and walked away. No explosions. No final confrontation. Just an ending that felt earned. People think revenge is about balance. An eye for an eye, pain for pain. But it's not. It's about clarity. About learning what you can live with after everything else has burned away. I don't know who will buy that car next, or if the GPS will ever speak again. Maybe it will stay silent. Maybe it will wait for someone else who needs to see the truth. But for me, Mark, the story ended where it began. With a drive into the unknown, guided not by anger, but by the voice of a man who refused to be forgotten.